When my son told me to find somewhere else to die, that I was useless now, I packed my bags like the obedient mother I'd always been. 3 days later, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, discovering that my supposedly loving husband had played the longest game of chess in history. Vincent was about to learn that sometimes the pawn becomes the queen. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me tell you how I went from homeless widow to the woman holding all the cards. Because, mon chéri, this story has more twists than a Parisian pâtisserie. 2 months ago, I was Marguerite Dubois, devoted wife of 43 years and mother to one spectacularly ungrateful son. When Etienne died of a heart attack at 71, I thought my world was ending. Vincent swooped in during my grief like a vulture in tailored harmony, cooing about how difficult this must be for me. "Maman, you can't possibly manage this big chateau alone," he'd said, his voice dripping with crocodile tears. The stairs, the upkeep, all those memories. It's not healthy. I should have seen the calculation behind his feigned concern. Vincent had always been Etienne's favorite, his little prince who could do no wrong. When he married that hedge fund heiress, Claire, and started producing grandchildren, Etienne doted on them all. Meanwhile, I was just the woman who cooked, cleaned, and kept the family's world spinning smoothly. After the funeral, Vincent became increasingly insistent about my situation. He'd bring Claire over for family dinners at our estate in the Loire Valley, where they'd corner me with glossy brochures for retirement villas and assisted living complexes. "Maman, these places are magnifique. You'd have people your own age, activities, no responsibilities." What they meant was no inheritance to split, no inconvenient mother to deal with. The final blow came last Tuesday. I'd been living in what Vincent now called our chateau for 6 weeks since Etienne's death, still sleeping in the guest suite because I couldn't bear to pack up our bedroom. Vincent arrived unannounced with Claire and 2 large Louis Vuitton suitcases. "Maman, we've made a decision. Claire's been promoted to head her firm's Paris office, and we need to move into town immediately. This chateau is perfect for us." I stared at him, not quite comprehending. "Move in? But this is my home." Vincent's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold ambition underneath. "Actually, Maman, according to Papa's will, I inherited everything. The chateau, the investments, all of it. I've been letting you stay here out of kindness, but it's time for you to find your own place." The words hit me like a slap across the face. "Vincent, surely there's been some mistake." "No mistake," he said coolly. "Papa knew I'd take better care of his legacy than you ever could. You never understood money or investments. You were just the wife. Just the wife." 43 years reduced to those 3 words. That's when he delivered the killing blow. "Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." I packed my things in a daze. 43 years of marriage fitting into 2 suitcases and a small box of photos. Vincent watched from the doorway, checking his Rolex like I was delaying his next board meeting. "There's a decent retirement home in Tours," he offered with the enthusiasm of someone recommending a mid-tier brasserie. "Very affordable. I'm sure they have openings." Affordable. My son was inheriting 27 million euros, and he was suggesting I check into what was essentially a charity home for the elderly. Claire loaded my suitcases into their sleek Mercedes with the efficiency of someone disposing of last season's wardrobe. "Marguerite, you'll love having your independence again," she said, avoiding my gaze. "No more worrying about chateau maintenance or property taxes. No more home," she meant. As we drove away, I watched my chateau, Etienne's chateau, Vincent's chateau now, disappear in the rearview mirror. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 4 decades making that house a home, hosting Vincent's lavish birthday soirees, nursing Etienne through his illness, tending to every detail he cherished. Now I was being driven to a budget auberge like an unwanted guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The Auberge du Soleil was exactly what you'd expect from a place charging 49 euros a night. Thin walls, thinner linens, and a carpet that had seen better decades. Vincent handed me 200 euros in cash like he was tipping a chambermaid. "This should cover you for a few days while you get settled," he said. "I'll have Claire transfer some money into your account once we sort through Papa's paperwork." Some money from my own inheritance. After they left, I sat on the sagging mattress and tried to process what had just happened. In the span of 3 hours, I'd gone from grieving widow to homeless senior citizen. The son I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for had discarded me like a faded vintage wine. But as I sat there in that dreary Aubert's room, something began nagging at me. Etienne had always been meticulous about his affairs, obsessively organized about important documents. He'd shown me the will years ago, explaining his wishes, making sure I understood everything, and I was absolutely certain that's not what it had said. Etienne had been many things: traditional, sometimes stubborn, occasionally patronizing about financial matters, but he wasn't cruel. The man who'd held my hand through my mother's death, who'd surprised me with roses every anniversary, wouldn't have left me destitute. The next morning, I used the Aubert's spotty Wi-Fi to search for Etienne's attorney, Henri Beaumont, the same lawyer who'd handled our chateau purchase and various business matters over the years. His office was in central Paris, a 20-minute bus ride that cost me precious euros but felt necessary. Henri Beaumont was a distinguished man in his 70s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When his secretary announced that Madame Dubois was here about her husband's estate, he looked genuinely surprised. "Marguerite, ma chère, I was wondering when you'd come in. I tried calling your chateau several times, but Vincent said you were traveling." "Traveling?" That's what my son had told him. "Monsieur Beaumont," I said, my voice trembling, "I need to ask you about Etienne's will." He looked puzzled. "Of course. Didn't Vincent provide you with your copy?" I gave him the original and several copies after the reading. My stomach dropped. There was a reading? Henry's brow furrowed. "Marguerite, you were supposed to be there. Vincent said you were too distraught, that he'd handle everything and ensure you received your inheritance." The blood drained from my face as the reality hit me. "Monsieur Beaumont," I whispered, "I was never told about any reading. Vincent told me he inherited everything." Henry's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. He reached for a thick file folder, his movements suddenly urgent. "Marguerite, that's impossible. Your husband's will is very specific about your inheritance." He pulled out a document, and I recognized Etienne's meticulous signature at the bottom, witnessed and notarized. But as Henri began reading, I realized Vincent had lied about everything. "I, Etienne Louis Dubois, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife, Marguerite and Dubois, the following: our primary residence at 12 Rue de Chêne, including all furnishings and personal effects. Additionally, I leave her 70% of all financial assets, investments, and accounts, totaling approximately 18.9 million euros. My head started spinning. 18.9 million euros. The chateau. 70% of everything. Henri continued reading, his voice growing more serious. "To my son, Vincent Dubois Leroy, I leave 8.1 million euros, to be held in trust with distributions beginning on his 45th birthday, contingent upon his treatment of his mother following my death." Contingent upon his treatment of me. Etienne had known. Somehow, he'd known exactly what Vincent would try to do. "Monsieur Beaumont," I whispered, "Vincent told me I inherited nothing. He moved into my chateau. He gave me 200 euros and suggested I find a retirement home." The elderly lawyer's face flushed with anger. "Marguerite, what Vincent has done is elder abuse and fraud. He's committed multiple felonies." "But he had legal documents," I protested. "He showed me papers." "Forged, most likely," Henri replied, "or documents from an earlier draft. Your husband updated his will 6 months before his death, specifically because he was concerned about Vincent's attitude toward money and his sense of entitlement." The room was spinning. All those times Vincent had dismissed my opinions, talked over me during family dinners, rolled his eyes when I tried to contribute to conversations about their lavish Riviera vacations or Claire's financial conquests. Etienne had been watching, evaluating, making decisions. "There's more, Marguerite," Henri said. "The trust provision for Vincent specifically states that if he fails to treat you with respect and dignity following my death, the entire 8.1 million euros reverts to you instead." I stared at him in shock. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying your son just cost himself 8.1 million euros. His inheritance is now yours as well. You're not inheriting 18.9 million euros, Marguerite. You're inheriting 27 million euros, plus the chateau and all personal property. The irony was so perfect it was almost laughable. Vincent had been so eager to claim his inheritance that he'd triggered the exact clause designed to protect me from his greed. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely steady. Henri smiled, and for the first time since Etienne's death, I saw genuine warmth directed at me. Now, ma chère, we call the police about the fraud. And then we call Vincent and inform him that he's about to receive the shock of his life. Can he fight this? With what money? Henri replied. He's about to discover that every account he thought he controlled actually belongs to you. Every investment, every bank account, every asset except the chateau is frozen pending investigation of his fraudulent activities. I thought about Vincent in my chateau, probably already planning renovations, shopping for new art with money he thought was his. Claire was probably calculating how the inheritance would bolster her firm's portfolio. They had no idea that in about 6 hours, their entire world was going to implode. Henri Beaumont's office became command central for what he gleefully called Operation Justice. He contacted the police, the banks, and a private investigator while I sat in his plush leather chair, still processing the magnitude of Vincent's deception. The forged documents are quite sophisticated, Inspector Laurent explained as she reviewed the fake will Vincent had shown me. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. Someone planned this carefully. You think Vincent had help? I asked. Almost certainly, she replied. Creating convincing legal forgeries requires specific knowledge and connections. We'll need to investigate whether Claire or someone in her financial network was involved, Inspector Laurent said, her tone sharp with determination. Within 2 hours, every account had been frozen. Vincent's credit cards, linked to what he thought were his new inheritance accounts, were declined. The chateau's utilities, which he'd already transferred to his name, were suspended pending ownership verification. My phone rang at exactly 3:47 p.m. Vincent's name flashed on the screen. Maman, where are you? There's some kind of mix-up with the bank accounts. They're saying Papa's assets are frozen. Hello Vincent, I said calmly. I'm sitting in Henri Beaumont's office. You remember him? Papa's attorney, the one who read the real will to an empty room while you told him I was traveling. Silence. Then, Maman, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I've discovered that you're a liar and a thief, mon chéri. I also discovered that your father was much smarter than either of us realized. His voice turned sharp, desperate. You don't understand. I was protecting you from the complexity of managing all that money. You've never had to deal with investments. Or I understand perfectly, I countered. You forged legal documents, committed fraud, and threw your 67-year-old mother out of her own chateau because you thought I was too stupid to notice. His voice grew frantic. Maman, you're confused. The grief has been overwhelming, and someone is obviously taking advantage of your emotional state. The audacity was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, Vincent was trying to manipulate me. Vincent, dear, let me clarify something for you. Not only did you never inherit anything, but your actual inheritance, the 8.1 million euros your father left you, is now mine as well, thanks to a lovely clause he included about treating me with dignity and respect. That's impossible, he sputtered. Inspector Laurent is sitting right here if you'd like to discuss the impossibility of fraud charges with her. The phone went quiet. I could almost hear Vincent's mind racing, calculating, searching for an angle. Maman, please, can we meet somewhere and talk about this reasonably? I'm sure we can work something out. Oh, we'll definitely be meeting soon, at the courthouse when you're arraigned. His voice hardened. You wouldn't dare press charges against your own son. Something cold and final crystallized in my chest. Watch me. I hung up and looked at Henri, who was beaming with approval. How long before he's arrested? I asked. Inspector Laurent has enough evidence for a warrant. They'll pick him up this evening. And Claire, her financial records are being subpoenaed. If she participated in creating those documents, she'll face charges too. My phone buzzed with a text from Vincent. Maman, please don't do this. Think about the grandchildren. I showed the message to Inspector Laurent, who smiled grimly. Emotional manipulation, classic behavior pattern for this type of crime. I typed back, I'm thinking about them. They deserve to see what happens when you steal from family. 20 minutes later, Claire called. Marguerite, surely we can resolve this privately. Vincent made some poor decisions, but involving the police seems excessive. Claire, did you help him forge those documents? I asked. That's not. You have to understand the pressure Vincent was under, she stammered. He was worried about your mental state, your ability to handle large sums of money. So that's a yes, I said coldly. It wasn't malicious, she insisted. He genuinely believed he was protecting you by throwing me out of my chateau and telling me to find somewhere to die. Claire was quiet. Claire, here's what's going to happen. You're both going to be arrested. You're both going to face fraud charges. And I'm going to be sitting in my chateau, watching it all unfold. Marguerite, please be reasonable, she pleaded. I was reasonable for 43 years, I replied. It didn't work out well for me. The police arrested Vincent at 8:30 p.m. while he was dining at Lou Bernardin, apparently celebrating his inheritance with Claire and another couple. According to Inspector Laurent, he screamed about false arrest and demanded to call his lawyer, who turned out to be Claire's hedge fund colleague with no experience in criminal law. Claire was arrested at her office the next morning. The forensic accountant traced the forged documents to a printing company Claire's firm used for creating fraudulent investment prospectuses. Apparently, my daughter-in-law had quite the criminal resume that Vincent either didn't know about or chose to ignore. I spent my first night back in my chateau in 43 years, sleeping in the master suite. Vincent had already moved his belongings into the space, replacing Etienne's careful organization with his chaos of tailored suits and expensive colognes. I packed everything into garbage bags and left them on the front terrace. Let him collect them when he makes bail. The chateau felt different now, not because Etienne was gone, but because I was finally seeing it as mine. For decades, I'd maintained it as Etienne's sanctuary, designed around his preferences, his needs, his vision of how we should live. Now, looking around with clear eyes, I realized how little of me had ever been reflected in these rooms. That was about to change. Henri called around noon with updates. Vincent's bail is set at 50,000 euros. Since all his accounts are frozen, he'll have to find someone else to cover it. What about Claire? 200,000 euros. Apparently, the judge wasn't impressed with her history of financial crimes. Who knew my daughter-in-law had been under investigation for securities fraud? I certainly hadn't known. But then again, I'd been excluded from most family financial discussions. Vincent and Claire had always spoken to me like I was a child when money came up, simplifying concepts they assumed I couldn't understand. They were about to learn how much I'd actually understood. Henri, I said, I want to make some changes to the chateau. Vincent had contractors lined up to renovate. I'd like to proceed with some of those plans, but with my own vision. Excellent idea, he replied. It's your home now, Marguerite. Do whatever makes you happy. What made me happy, I realized, was the idea of undoing every assumption Vincent had made about my inheritance. He planned to gut the kitchen, replace the parquet floors, and convert Etienne's study into a wine cellar. I was going to turn the study into an art studio and the wine cellar plans into a library. My phone rang. Unknown number. Madame Dubois, this is Jean Martin from Canal 7 News. We understand you're the victim of a significant elder fraud case involving your son. Would you be willing to share your story? Word was getting out. In a city like Paris, the arrest of a prominent hedge fund heiress and her husband for defrauding his elderly mother-in-law was news. Mademoiselle Martin, I appreciate your interest, but I'm not ready to make public statements. I understand this must be difficult, she said, but your story could help other seniors recognize warning signs of family financial abuse. She had a point. How many other women my age were being manipulated by adult children who saw them as inconvenient obstacles to inheritance? If I decided to tell my story, would I have control over how it's presented? Absolutely, she replied. We could arrange a sit-down interview where you'd have approval over the final edit. I thought about Vincent, probably sitting in a jail cell right now, still believing this was all a misunderstanding he could charm his way out of. Mademoiselle Martin, let me get back to you. I might have quite a story to tell. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of the expensive Bordeaux Claire had sent us for Noël. Wine I was apparently now drinking in my own chateau, purchased with my own money, while contemplating whether to publicly humiliate my son on television. Life had certainly taken an interesting turn. The doorbell rang at 7 a.m. sharp. Through the window, I could see Vincent on my front terrace, wearing yesterday's clothes and looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. He'd made bail somehow. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Maman, please. We need to talk." "We talked yesterday," I said. "You told me to find somewhere to die. I found somewhere to live instead." Vincent's eyes were red-rimmed, his usual perfect composure completely shattered. "I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But I'm still your son." "Are you?" I replied. "Because sons don't typically forge legal documents to steal their mother's inheritance." "I wasn't stealing," he stammered, clearly struggling to find words that didn't sound criminal. "You were what, Vincent?" "I was trying to protect you from making poor financial decisions. You've never managed large amounts of money." Even now, even after being arrested for fraud, he couldn't admit the truth. In Vincent's mind, he was still the victim of my unreasonable expectations. "Vincent, let me share something your father told me 6 months before he died. He said he was worried about your sense of entitlement, your attitude toward money, and how you treated people you considered beneath you." His face went pale. "Papa never said that." "He said you reminded him of his sister, Eleanor. Beautiful, charming, and completely incapable of thinking about anyone but yourself. He told me he was changing the will specifically because he was afraid of what you'd do to me if you had control." "That's a lie," he whispered. I pulled out my phone and showed him a video file. "Actually, it's not. Your father recorded a message explaining his decision, to be played if you ever contested the will or treated me poorly after his death." Vincent stared at the phone like it was a venomous serpent. He knew, mon chéri. He knew exactly who you were underneath all that charm. The only thing he didn't predict was how far you'd actually go. "Play it," he whispered. I touched the screen, and Etienne's voice filled the morning air, clear, measured, and absolutely devastating. "If you're hearing this, Vincent, it means my fears about your character were justified. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped that my son had more integrity than I suspected. But if Marguerite is playing this recording, it means you've proven me right in the worst possible way." Vincent sank onto the terrace steps as Etienne's voice continued. "I spent 43 years watching your mother sacrifice her dreams, her ambitions, her independence to take care of our family. She worked part-time jobs to help pay for your university while I built my business. She postponed her education, gave up career opportunities, and poured herself into being the wife and mother she thought we needed." The recording continued for 3 more minutes, each word carefully chosen, each sentence a scalpel cutting through Vincent's justifications and self-deceptions. "By the time you hear this, you'll have discovered that treating your mother poorly has cost you everything. I hope it was worth it." When it ended, Vincent was crying. Not the calculated tears he'd used to manipulate people since childhood, but ugly, broken sobs. "He hated me," he whispered. "No, Vincent," I said. "He loved you enough to hope you'd prove him wrong. You chose to prove him right instead." He looked up at me, his face streaked with tears. "What happens now?" "Now you face the consequences of your choices. The fraud charges, the investigation, the public humiliation when this story hits the news." "The news?" His voice cracked. "Canal 7 wants to interview me about elder financial abuse. I'm thinking of saying yes." Vincent's face crumpled completely. "Maman, please, think about what this will do to the grandchildren, to Claire's career, to our whole family." "I am thinking about it," I replied. "I'm thinking about how you didn't consider any of those things when you decided to commit multiple felonies." He stood up slowly, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. "I know you won't believe this, but I never meant for it to go this far. I wanted the money. I wanted the security, the status. I wanted to never have to worry about anything again." For the first time since this nightmare began, Vincent was telling the truth. "I believe you, mon chéri," I said, "but wanting something doesn't justify destroying people to get it." He nodded, tears still flowing. "What can I do to fix this?" "You can start by admitting what you did was wrong. Not misguided, not protective, not complicated, wrong." "It was wrong," he whispered. "It was completely, unforgivably wrong. And then," I continued, "you can face whatever consequences come next with some dignity instead of trying to manipulate your way out of them." Vincent looked at me for a long moment, seeing, perhaps for the first time, not the pushover mother he'd always known, but the woman who'd just outmaneuvered him completely. "I deserved this, didn't I?" "Yes, Vincent," I said. "You absolutely did." 3 days after Vincent's terrace confession, Claire's mother showed up at my door. Eleanor Leroux was everything I'd expected. Perfectly coiffed, dripping with jewelry, and radiating the kind of entitlement that only comes from 3 generations of inherited wealth. "Marguerite," she said, "we need to discuss this situation rationally." I invited her in, curious to see what version of reality the Leroux family had constructed to explain their daughter's felony charges. Eleanor settled herself in my salon like she was granting me an audience. "Claire made some poor choices, obviously, but prosecuting her seems rather vindictive, don't you think?" "Vindictive?" I echoed. "Your daughter helped steal my inheritance and threw me out of my own chateau." "Claire was following Vincent's lead," Eleanor said smoothly. "She didn't understand the full situation. The woman was actually trying to blame my son for her daughter's criminal behavior. I had to admire the audacity." "Madame Leroux," I said, "Claire created forged legal documents. That's not following someone's lead. That's conspiracy to commit fraud." "Claire's lawyer believes we can reach a settlement that benefits everyone," she replied. "You get your chateau back, Vincent faces appropriate consequences, and Claire avoids the publicity of a trial." Appropriate consequences. As if Vincent's crimes were a minor etiquette violation. "What kind of settlement?" I asked. Eleanor smiled, clearly believing she'd found an opening. "Claire's family is prepared to compensate you for your inconvenience. Let's say €2 million in exchange for dropping the charges against Claire. €2 million to forgive the woman who'd helped steal €27 million from me. Madame Leroux, your daughter participated in a scheme that cost me everything I owned. You think €2 million covers that?" "Marguerite, be realistic," she said, her tone patronizing. "Claire has a career, children, a reputation to maintain. Sending her to prison serves no one." "It serves justice," I replied. Eleanor's polished facade cracked slightly. "Justice? You're destroying multiple families over money you'd never have known how to manage anyway." There it was, the same condescending attitude that had poisoned my relationship with Vincent. In their world, I was just the help who'd gotten uppity. "Madame Leroux, I think we're done here," I said firmly. "Marguerite, please reconsider. €5 million, final offer. €5 million to let Claire walk free." The amount was staggering, but the principle was non-negotiable. "My answer is no." Eleanor stood, her composure completely restored. "Very well. But you should know that Claire's legal team has found some interesting information about your husband's business practices. It would be unfortunate if that became public during the trial." The threat was clear, but I felt no fear, only curiosity. "What kind of information?" "The kind that might make you reconsider who the real criminal in this situation was." After she left, I called Henri immediately. "Marguerite, whatever they think they found, it doesn't change the facts of Vincent and Claire's crimes." "But could it affect the case?" "Potentially," he admitted, "if they can muddy the waters enough, create doubt about Etienne's character or business practices, it might influence a jury." I thought about Etienne, about our marriage, about all the secrets that might be buried in 43 years of shared life. "Henri, I want to know everything about Etienne's business. Every deal, every partnership, every potential irregularity." "Marguerite, are you sure? Sometimes the past is better left alone." "The Leroux family is threatening to drag Etienne's memory through the mud to protect their criminal daughter. I'd rather know the truth first. That evening, I sat in Etienne's study, my study now, and began going through his files systematically. Etienne had been meticulously organized, every document dated and categorized. But as I dug deeper into his business records, I began finding things that didn't quite make sense. Payments to shell companies, consulting fees that seemed excessive, partnerships with firms that appeared to exist only on paper. By midnight, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my husband. The private investigator Henri recommended was a sharp-eyed woman named Camille Dubois, who specialized in financial crimes. She spent 6 hours in Etienne's study, photographing documents and building what she called the real picture of my husband's business empire. "Madame Dubois," she said, "your husband was running a sophisticated money laundering operation through his consulting firm. We're talking about millions of euros in illegal transactions over the past decade." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. Etienne was the most honest man I knew. "I'm sorry, but the evidence is overwhelming. He was washing money for organized crime families, using his legitimate business as a front." I stared at the documents spread across Etienne's desk. Invoices for services never rendered. Consulting contracts with companies that didn't exist. Payment schedules that corresponded with known criminal activities. How long has this been going on? Based on these records, at least 12 years, probably longer. 12 years. While I was planning dinner parties and attending charity galas, my husband was facilitating criminal enterprises. Madame Dubois, there's more. The 8.1 million euros Etienne left Vincent, that money came directly from laundered funds. If the authorities discover this, they'll seize everything as proceeds of criminal activity. The room started spinning. Everything, the chateau, the investments, all of it. Unless what? Camille looked uncomfortable. Unless Vincent and Claire's legal team already knows about this and is planning to use it as leverage. If they tip off the authorities about your husband's crimes, they might be able to negotiate immunity in exchange for cooperation. My son and his wife weren't just thieves. They were holding a nuclear weapon over my head. What are my options? Legally, you could contact the authorities yourself, come forward voluntarily, and hope for leniency. You'd lose most of the money, but you might keep the chateau. And if I don't, Vincent and Claire's lawyers will probably leak this information strategically. You'll lose everything anyway, but you'll also face potential charges for unknowingly benefiting from criminal activity. I thought about Eleanor Leroux's smug confidence, her certainty that I'd accept their settlement offer. They'd known about Etienne's crimes all along. Camille, how did they find out about this? Claire's a hedge fund manager. She'd have recognized the patterns in your husband's financial records. The question is, what are they planning to do with this information? My phone rang. Vincent's number. "Maman, we need to meet tonight. There are things you need to know about Papa that change everything." "I already know, Vincent." Silence. "Then you know what?" "I know about the money laundering. I know about the criminal connections. I know that everything your father left us is tainted." "Maman, listen to me carefully. Claire's lawyers have been in contact with the authorities. They're willing to let us renegotiate our situation." "What kind of renegotiation?" "Claire gets immunity in exchange for providing information about Papa's criminal network. You get to keep 5 million euros and the chateau. The rest goes to the government." "And you?" "The fraud charges disappear. We all walk away from this mess." It was brilliant in a sociopathic way. Vincent had turned my moral victory into his strategic advantage. "Vincent, you're asking me to help you profit from your crimes by exploiting Papa's crimes. I'm asking you to be practical. The alternative is losing everything and potentially facing charges yourself." I looked around Etienne's study, seeing it clearly for the first time. The expensive furniture, the rare books, the art collection, all of it purchased with blood money. "I need time to think." "Maman, the meeting with the authorities is tomorrow morning." "Claire's lawyer needs an answer tonight," Vincent said. After hanging up, I sat in the darkness of Etienne's study, surrounded by the evidence of his double life. 43 years of marriage to a stranger, a son who'd inherited more than money from his father. He'd inherited his talent for deception. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated who I was when my back was against the wall. I picked up the phone and dialed Camille Dubois. Camille, how quickly can you get me a meeting with the authorities? I have a story to tell them, and I think they're going to find it very interesting. Agent Sophie Martin looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a federal investigator: serious, intelligent, and completely immune to charm. She sat across from me in Henry's conference room, recording our conversation and taking notes with mechanical precision. Madame Dubois, you understand that by coming forward voluntarily, you're potentially admitting to benefiting from criminal proceeds? I understand, I said, but I'd rather tell you the truth than let my son and his wife manipulate this situation to their advantage. I laid out everything: Etienne's hidden business, Vincent's fraud scheme, Claire's forgeries, and the extortion attempt masquerading as a settlement offer. Your son believes he can trade information about your husband's crimes for immunity from his own charges. That's exactly what he believes, I said, and he thinks I'll cooperate because I'm afraid of losing everything. Agent Martin smiled for the first time. Are you afraid, Madame Dubois? Agent Martin, 2 weeks ago, I was a grieving widow sleeping in a budget auberge. Today, I'm sitting here voluntarily confessing to federal agents about my dead husband's criminal enterprise. Fear is no longer my primary emotion. What is? Anger. Pure, crystallized anger at being manipulated by people who underestimated my intelligence for decades. Agent Martin's smile widened. Madame Dubois, would you be willing to wear a wire? 3 hours later, I was sitting in my salon with a recording device taped to my chest, waiting for Vincent and Claire to arrive for what they thought was a surrender meeting. They knocked at exactly 8 p.m., both dressed like they were attending a business dinner. Claire carried a briefcase that probably contained immunity agreements and settlement papers. Maman, you look better than you have in weeks, Vincent said, kissing my cheek like nothing had happened. I feel better, I replied. Clarity has that effect. Claire opened her briefcase with the efficiency of someone who'd conducted similar negotiations before. Marguerite, our lawyers have structured this very favorably for you. You retain the chateau, 5 million euros in clean assets, and complete immunity from any charges related to Etienne's activities. Clean assets, I said. That's an interesting phrase. Vincent shot Claire a warning look. Maman, the important thing is that we're all protected. The past stays buried, and we all move forward. What about the 27 million euros Etienne actually left me? Maman, that money is tainted, Vincent said. It can't be separated from Papa's criminal activities. Taking 5 million is the best outcome possible. And you too? What do you get out of this arrangement? Claire leaned forward, her confidence returning. We get to put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us. Vincent's charges disappear, my reputation remains intact, and our family can heal. Misunderstanding, I said. You're still calling felony fraud a misunderstanding. Marguerite, Claire said, help us understand something. When exactly did you discover Etienne's criminal activities? What do you mean? I mean, did you know about the money laundering when you married Vincent? Or did you discover it recently when you were planning to steal my inheritance? Vincent and Claire exchanged glances. Marguerite, I don't think that's relevant to our current discussion. Actually, I think it's very relevant, I said, because if you knew about Etienne's crimes and said nothing, that makes you an accessory after the fact. And if you only discovered them while committing your own crimes, that makes you remarkably unlucky. Vincent's composure was starting to crack. Maman, what are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that you two have been planning this for months, possibly years. The forged will, the money laundering discovery, even Claire's connections to document forgers. None of this was spontaneous. That's ridiculous, Vincent said. Is it? Agent Martin finds it quite plausible. The color drained from both their faces. Agent Martin? Claire whispered. From the authorities, I said. She's been very interested in my story about systematic elder abuse, fraud, and extortion. Particularly the part where you tried to blackmail me with my dead husband's crimes. Vincent stood up abruptly, reaching for his briefcase. Marguerite, this conversation is over. Actually, Vincent, I think it's just beginning. Agent Martin and 2 other federal agents entered my salon as Vincent and Claire sat frozen in place. The briefcase Claire had been reaching for was confiscated immediately, along with both their phones. Vincent Dubois Leroux and Claire Leroux, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion of a federal witness. Vincent turned to me with an expression of absolute betrayal. Maman, how could you do this to your own family? The same way you could forge legal documents and steal my inheritance, mon chéri, I said, except my way is legal. As the agents handcuffed them, Claire tried one last desperate play. Marguerite, you don't understand what you've done. There are people connected to Etienne's business who won't appreciate federal attention. You've put yourself in danger. Agent Martin paused in reading them their rights. Madame Leroux, are you threatening a federal witness? I'm warning her about the reality of her situation, Claire said. The reality, Agent Martin replied, is that you just added witness intimidation to your charges. After they were removed, Agent Martin sat back down across from me. Madame Dubois, Claire's warning might not be entirely empty. Your husband was connected to some dangerous people. How dangerous? The Moretti crime family, primarily. They've been using legitimate businesses to launder money for decades. Your husband's consulting firm was one of their most successful operations. The name meant nothing to me, but the agent's expression told me everything I needed to know. Are you saying I'm in actual physical danger? Potentially. But there's something else you should know about your husband's operation. Something that changes everything. Agent Martin pulled out a thick file folder, the kind that suggested months of investigation. Madame Dubois, your husband wasn't just laundering money for the Moretti family. He was an informant for the authorities. For 12 years, he was providing information about their operations while appearing to facilitate their money laundering. The world tilted sideways. Etienne was working for the authorities, deep cover, long-term investigation. The operation was so sensitive that even local officers weren't informed. Your husband was helping us build cases against multiple crime families. But the money was real. The authorities allowed him to keep a percentage of the laundered funds as payment for his cooperation and to maintain his cover. Everything he left you was earned through legitimate cooperation. I stared at her, trying to process this revelation. So, the 27 million euros is legally mine? Your husband died before the investigation concluded, but his cooperation over 12 years directly led to 47 arrests and the seizure of over 200 million euros in criminal assets. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because the investigation was ongoing, and because we weren't certain about your involvement or knowledge. Your son and daughter-in-law's fraud scheme actually helped us confirm your innocence. Vincent and Claire didn't know any of this. They suspected criminal activity, but they had no idea about the federal cooperation. They were planning to blackmail me with information that would have actually exonerated my husband. The irony was so perfect, it was almost poetic. Vincent had tried to steal my inheritance twice, once through fraud and once through blackmail based on incomplete information. Agent Martin, what happens now? Now you get your money back, your son and daughter-in-law face charges, and you get to decide what kind of life you want to build with your legitimate inheritance. As for the danger Claire mentioned, the Moretti family will be too busy dealing with their own legal problems to worry about you. We're executing search warrants across 3 regions tomorrow morning. I looked around my salon, seeing it again as the site of my resurrection rather than my humiliation. Agent Martin, can I ask you something? Of course. In your professional opinion, am I a terrible person for feeling satisfaction about Vincent's arrest? Agent Martin smiled. Madame Dubois, in my professional opinion, you're a woman who refused to be victimized. That's not terrible. That's inspiring. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my renovated chateau, making coffee for 2. The morning sun streamed through new windows that actually opened properly, illuminating countertops I'd chosen myself for the first time in 43 years. "Good morning, Marguerite." Dr. Sophie Chin, Camille's sister and my new financial advisor, appeared in the doorway, carrying a thick folder of investment reports. "Good morning, Sophie. Ready for our quarterly review?" The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media interviews, and personal transformation. Vincent and Claire were each serving 18-month sentences. The news coverage of their crimes had made me something of a celebrity in senior advocacy circles. "Your portfolio is performing excellently," Sophie said, settling at my new breakfast table. "The charitable foundation is fully operational, and the scholarship fund has already selected its first recipients." The Marguerite Dubois Foundation for Elder Protection had become my primary focus. Using 15 million euros of my inheritance, we were funding legal aid for seniors facing family financial abuse and supporting legislative changes to strengthen elder protection laws. Any word on the documentary? A streaming service confirmed the production deal. They want to start filming next month. My story had captured media attention far beyond the initial news coverage. The Mother's Revenge, a French crime story, was being developed as a limited series, with the proceeds going to elder advocacy organizations. "And Vincent?" Sophie's expression grew careful. "He's written again. His lawyer says he wants to apologize and ask for forgiveness." Vincent had written me 17 letters from prison. I'd read the first few, which ranged from self-justifying to desperate, before deciding to stop opening them. Some relationships, once broken, can't be repaired with words. "Sophie, has my stance on that changed?" "Not according to our previous conversations, Marguerite," Sophie replied, "but people do evolve. Even people who've made terrible choices." I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, grieving, dependent, willing to accept whatever scraps of dignity my family offered me. That woman might have felt obligated to forgive Vincent, to rebuild a relationship based on guilt and tradition, but that woman was gone. "Sophie, schedule a meeting with Vincent's lawyer, not to reconcile, but to make something clear." "What kind of thing?" "I want Vincent to understand that his actions had consequences beyond legal punishment. I want him to know that he destroyed our relationship permanently and that his children will grow up knowing why their father went to prison." "That seems harsh," Sophie said. "Good. It's supposed to be harsh. Vincent made adult choices that hurt people he was supposed to love. He doesn't get to escape the emotional consequences just because he's written some prison letters." Sophie made notes in her leather portfolio. "And the grandchildren?" Vincent's requested supervised visits with them. "My relationship with Vincent's children will be based on their choices when they're adults, not their father's rehabilitation efforts." The doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a delivery truck with a large package. "Must be the new furniture for the studio," I told Sophie. The art studio had been my favorite renovation project. Etienne's former study was now a bright, airy space where I was rediscovering my love of painting, something I'd abandoned when I got married and assumed the role of supporting wife and mother. "Marguerite, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret how this all played out? The prison sentences, the media attention, the permanent family estrangement." I considered the question while signing for my delivery. 6 months ago, I'd been invisible, a widow with no money, no home, and no prospects. Today, I was a millionaire philanthropist with a foundation, a documentary deal, and a purpose that extended far beyond my own survival. "Sophie, my son tried to steal everything I owned and leave me homeless. My daughter-in-law created forged documents and threatened me with blackmail. They showed me exactly who they were when they thought I was powerless to stop them." "But they're still family," Sophie said. "No, they're still DNA. Family are the people who protect you when you're vulnerable, not the people who exploit your vulnerability for profit." Sophie closed her portfolio, satisfied with my response. "Besides," I added, "look what I became when I stopped allowing them to define my worth." After Sophie left, I walked through my chateau, really my chateau now, decorated according to my taste, organized around my priorities. In the art studio, I uncovered my latest painting, a self-portrait of a woman standing in bright sunlight, her face turned toward the future. The woman in the painting looked nothing like the grieving widow who'd packed her life into 2 suitcases 6 months ago. This woman looked powerful, independent, unafraid. She looked like someone who'd learned that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming everything your enemies never thought you could be. Outside, the sun was setting behind trees I'd planted myself in soil that belonged to me, on property I'd defended through intelligence and courage rather than inherited through marriage or birth.